All right guys, today we got a 4th gen Dodge Ram here that we're going to be installing the all aluminum blend doors from Blend Door USA. Blend Door USA was nice enough to send us their product for free. In exchange, I would make a detailed how-to video of how to get it all installed. So I'm going to try my best to walk you through the whole procedure, beginning to end. And before we start, I will say you need to have the refrigerant recovered with the refrigerant recovery machine, as not only does the dash need to be removed, but the HVAC housing needs to be removed as well, which contains the AC evaporator core. It's full of refrigerant, so you got to get it recovered before you start the job. The other thing is you're going to need 2 people to do this job, as the dash is very heavy, so have a second person when it comes time to pull the dash and reinstall the dash. You want to make sure the airbags are disarmed before pulling the steering column or really doing anything in the dash. So after we get the center console out, we're going to be disconnecting the batteries. Very important. Leave them disconnected for 2 minutes and it will disarm the airbag so you don't hurt yourself. I highly recommend before doing the job, do a code scan on all of the modules. You don't have to have an expensive snap-on scanner, and this is not required, but as a professional, I always do a code scan before doing anything. So if any modules have any error codes, I know beforehand, so if I put the dash back in and there's a problem, I can see, did I cause that problem or was that problem there before I started? Because we're going to be removing the whole dash. There's lots of electrical connections. We want to make sure there's no codes in the system, or if there are codes, we know them before we go pull the dash and put it back together. It's going to save you a whole bunch of headache if there's a problem after the job is completed. You also must have a scanner to recalibrate the air door actuators. This truck has 5 air door actuators, and you always, anytime you're replacing the doors or the actuators themselves, you want to do a recalibrate procedure. The good news is if you don't have a scanner, you can still do the job, put all the parts in the truck and then drive it and have it calibrated at a shop. Now I will say the method of dash removal for these 4th gen trucks is going to be a little different from year model to year model, and depending on what options the vehicles have. Some have single climate control, some have dual climate control. You have standard transmissions, you got to pull the shifter out. If it's an automatic, you don't have to worry about that, but it might have a center console like this truck has, so the center console is going to have to be removed. Some trucks like this one have rear AC, so you have to work around that ductwork. So there's a little bit of a difference between exactly which truck you have, but for the most part, they're all going to be the same as far as the dash. The good news is this is a dual climate control model with the center console, so watching this video, you should be able to pretty much do them all, because this will pretty much be the hardest one to do, in that you have to remove the center console. It's got rear AC, it's got dual climate control, so keep that in mind. There's going to be some minor differences from truck to truck. Something else I wanted to go over is other parts that we recommend replacing when you have the dash out is the heater core, and only buy Mopar if you can get it. If you can't get Mopar, if the original one's not leaking, I'd leave it alone. The aftermarket ones are not very good, but you know, if you're going to have this stuff apart, there's hardly any extra time involved at all to go ahead and throw new parts in. Heater cores like to leak on all vehicles, so a good idea to replace this along with the AC evaporator core. If you do decide to replace this, get yourself some PAG oil for the AC. Air door actuators, highly recommend replacing these. There's 5 of them in this model. If it had just the single climate control, there's only going to be 4. They are all the same part number, so that makes it easy. Highly recommend having some foam tape. There is foam tape installed on the top of the HVAC housing where the dash ductwork goes on top, and that foam over time, especially if it's an older model, deteriorates, and that can create a lower amount of airflow out the dash vents. So we always replace the foam while we have the dash out. You will of course need some coolant, and in this case we are going to be replacing the actual the air inlet door. Some people call it the recirculation door. This door here brings in outside air into the vehicle, and they have replacement doors here. So you have, this is your temperature blend. It swivels in the middle because it's the dual climate control, and then you have your 2 mode doors, and these are all aluminum. But for the recirculation door, being that it's not just a flat piece of aluminum, it's curved, it's harder to make something to replace it. They simply give you these aluminum repair brackets, and but as you see when I pull this one apart, the recirculation door broke in such a manner on this truck that I decided it was best to replace the door because it was cracked really bad. You can see this if you just drop the glove box down and stick a bore scope. back here, you will be able to tell if it's in the recirculate mode, and you look in there with a borescope, or you don't even really have to have a borescope, just a mirror and a flashlight, and see if it's got like a bunch of cracks. If it's cracked up really bad, it'd probably be best to go ahead and buy a new assembly here, and then if you wanted to, you can install their repair brackets. Now, I will be installing their repair brackets on the old one to show you how it is installed. And also, another thing is these trucks do not come with a cabin air filter, which means all the dirty air that's being sucked in, especially if you're running it on the outside air mode, all that dirt clogs up the evaporator core, which that can reduce airflow through the dash and make the AC not work as well. So we highly recommend installing a cabin air filter retrofit kit. This is an updated Mopar air inlet housing that already has the door installed for the cabin filter to slide in. So that's one advantage to going with a new air inlet housing, is it's already made for it. But if you don't get a new air inlet housing, your housing will still look exactly like this. It's just going to have a piece of plastic here, and you can cut that out with a hot knife. It already has the tabs where you can buy. This is a door made by Dorman, and I'll include those part numbers in the description, but you can get this Dorman door, slide in your cabin filter, and it's going to snap on there just like the factory, and so you don't have to actually change the whole housing here to get yourself a cabin filter. One more thing before we begin. I highly recommend writing down each part in the order that you remove them. That way when you go to reinstall the dash, it all goes back in the same exact order that it was taken apart. Very, very important. For instance, there's some bolts above the steering column, and if you put the steering column in and forget about the bolts, now you got to pull all that stuff back apart to put those two bolts in. It's really easy to forget. So if this is your first time, highly, highly recommend writing it down. Leave yourself a breadcrumb trail, and you can easily stick it all back together. All right, so the first step is to get all the refrigerant recovered out of the AC system. Here you can see there's no more pressure left. All right, so first thing, we got to get the center console out of here. What you want to do is this little tray here is rubber. Just pull it forward, and then it pulls up and out, and there should be two screws. Somebody's already removed them in the past and never put them back. It has a little plastic cover on each side here that you got to pull off, and just take a little pry tool and pry it out, and it's got these three little clips. You just pries out. There should be a screw here, and then you got a bolt here. All right, so now you're going to go ahead and remove that bolt, and that screw if it had it. Then there's another bolt right here on the side of the center console. You reach down here, they're both 10mm head, and a swivel socket works really good for these. So now we're going to do the same exact thing on the driver's side. And this is why I left the batteries connected until we get the center console out. As this has power seats, I need to move the seat back in order to access this bolt. So that right there is a tight reach extension wrench. Works really good for getting in those hard to get spaces. So now that we got all four bolts out of the console, our two screws going in from the corner, and these two screws here, which like I said, those were missing, we're going to go ahead and pull this back. And now we need to remove the screws out of this cubby here. 7mm, we got some couple in the cup holder here. Now open the center console, and you can grab this whole piece here, this silver border. It'll lift the whole thing up, and then you need to disconnect this 12-volt power plug. And this will all be removed. That power plug, you just have to press that one little prong in and then pull out. So now we have this one electrical connector here that we need to separate. If you get up under here with a pry tool, it's got one of those like Christmas tree pins that holds it, and then push in this like that and pull that apart. Now we should be able to slide the console back and lift it up and get it out of our way. Now there is one electrical connection here that goes into the center console, but it has enough slack where we can leave that connected and just tilt it up, because we need to be able to lay the dash onto the seats. Now that we have the center console folded up, we want to power our seats all the way back and then disconnect our batteries. You want to disconnect both batteries and you want to disconnect the grounds. I like to put these little protective caps over the terminals, that way it can't touch and make contact. So now we want to remove both A-pillar covers. They have 2 bolts underneath these little covers here. Just pop those off with a little screwdriver. And they're 10mm head. Now that the bolts are removed, just give this thing a good tug and it'll pop off. It's just got one little connector there that pushes in. You might have to get a little pry tool behind here and pry it, but most of the time you can just pull it straight off. So here's a little tip. As you remove parts, a lot of times you can go ahead and just reinstall the bolts where they came from. That way you don't mix them up, because there's probably going to be some different length bolts, and you don't want to put a long one where a short one should go, and vice versa. Now we repeat for the other side. Now once you pop it out, it just sort of pulls up. You see it's got these 2 prongs. They push down. So pop it out and then pull up. Now we're going to remove the glove box. Just open it up and you can press in these little retention tabs on the side. It's got 1 on each side and it'll then open up all the way. You have to open it up all the way and then you can pull it off. You can see the hinges here are slotted, so it's got to be opened up to about that position and it pulls right off. So now we're going to be removing this little plastic piece here, and it just use a little pry tool and work around it. These things usually pop off pretty easily. I'm grabbing the panel, I'm going to be pulling it back. Sometimes you have to get up behind the door weather stripping and pry like so, and the whole thing comes off. As you can see, it's got pulled backwards to get these little spikes out, and then on the bottom it just pushes down. So that's why we were lifting up, and we'll pull the whole thing out. So now that we got this panel out of the way, you'll see there's a series of electrical connections, and if you look here, this is the metal part of the dash, so this is going to be removed, and you see this harness is attached to the metal part of the dash. The harness stays with the dash, so all these wires we need to disconnect from these connectors to be able to pull the dash. You're usually pretty simple. So on this gray connector, we have this tab here we need to push in while also prying the connector apart. If these things don't come apart, get some compressed air and try to blow any dirt that may be in there. It'll help them release. This one, if you get behind it with a pry tool, it's just pushed into the body. You can have a little bit more room to work with. You pull it away from the body, this hinge hinges over. And while you swing the hinge, pull the connectors apart at the same time, or else you will break this little hinge piece. This connector here, very straightforward, like that. This is the antenna, I believe. Unplug that, and you got another, what appears to be an antenna wire there. That one's got to be pried out of the body. Okay, so now we have this whole harness goes with the dash is now disconnected and ready to go. So now we want to remove this plastic piece at the end of the dash here. So take a couple pry tools. You want to pry in a couple different places, and it'll pop off like so. Now we can gain access to the bolts that hold the dash in that we will be removing later. So now there's a little cover here on the top of the dash we need to remove. Just get a little 90-degree pick, and at the very front center it has a little access where you can put that pick under to pry it up and out. And there's a 10mm head bolt. You want a swivel socket and pull that right out of there. Just like so. Now we're going to repeat on the driver's side. There you go. So now, just like the passenger side, we have this panel at the end of the dash. It pulls off the same exact way. Now behind that panel is this harness here that goes to this green connector. We need to disconnect this because this stays with the A-pillar. It comes up here and that's going to stay with the truck. So just pry these little anchor points off. And then on the connector, just take a little pick and just press in right there and pull it apart. And then take this and snake it through the dash, and that's gonna stay with the truck when the dash comes off. So much like the driver's side, this also has a harness on the passenger side, and we need to disconnect this connector here because the harness goes with the dash. So disconnect this, and this is going to be pulled with the dash. I like to just sort of pull it through that little slot there and keep it. It keeps it in place while we pull the dash. Now we're going to remove the knee bolster. There are 2 7mm head screws, and then it's going to slide backwards. And then the OBD2 port has a little tab you press in on each side. Remove that. And then you have your hood release cable. It's got a couple tabs you can press in on the cable itself. One at a time. Pull that out of there, and now you can remove the knee bolster. Now we're going to be removing the steering column clamshells. It's got 3 T20 Torx screws. You need a long Torx here to be able to reach up in there and pull out the screws. Like I said, it's one there. And then on the right hand side, it's got one right here. And then it's got one in the middle here. There you go. Caught that one with my hand. And then this whole lower piece will pull straight down. And out. The upper piece will lift off as well. Now we need to disconnect all the electrical connections on the steering column. You just press in the little tabs here. They're usually pretty easy to pull apart. On the top here, we got a connector here. This connector here has a tab. I don't know if you can see it in the mirror there. On the back side, take a 90-degree pick, and you can press in the tab and then pull it apart. Don't forget this connector here. And this connector here. So now we're going to remove the brake pedal switch, press the brake pedal down, rotate it counterclockwise. It's going to sound like it's going to break almost. And then it'll pull straight out. That's it. So now we want to remove the shift cable for the automatic transmission. Just pry it off of there. And then you got a couple tabs here you need to press in to pull it off of the steering column. Now, before we remove the steering column, we want to make sure to zip tie the steering wheel from turning. So we got a little hole in the steering column here, and we're going to feed it through, because if the steering wheel were to turn after removing the steering column, it will break the clock spring if it rotates more than about 2 to 3 revolutions. So that'll keep it from turning when it's removed from the vehicle. So now we need to remove the steering shaft bolt. It's 13 millimeter. And then we have 4 13 millimeter nuts that hold the steering column to the dash. Now once you remove that last nut, that steering column can drop on you, so be careful. But it's not really heavy. Just drop it down. Probably want to go ahead and pull that steering shaft off before you do that, but that time it came out real easy. So now that the steering column is out of the way, you'll find 2 10 millimeter head bolts here above the steering column. Those are the bolts you do not want to forget about when you go put the steering column back in. So as far as electrical goes on the driver's side, we have this harness here. This is coming with the dash. We need to disconnect these connectors. You do not have to worry about the accelerator pedal position sensor, as this stays with the body of the truck, so you can leave that plugged in. But these connectors, just pull them apart. Pretty straightforward. This one has one of those hinges on it. You have to grab that white colored part of the hinge and pull that apart. There you go. So now I'm going to remove the parking brake release rod. These little clips here, you just take a pair of pliers and it'll pop off. See how that just popped out of there? I also like to do it on the handle end as well. There you go. Now do take note which way you pulled it out. On this one, the blue mark faced towards the rear of the truck. So now we're going to be removing the driver's side kick panel. It's just like the passenger side. Pry it up and pull it back. Now the reason I removed that driver's side kick panel, I thought I wasn't going to have to, but I need to pull this carpet up because it has this wiring harness that goes underneath the carpet, and so when I lay this dash backwards, it's going to be pulling on this harness. So I need the carpet out of the way so the harness can be pulled back with the dash. Now before we can pull this carpet back, we got to pull this little ductwork off here. And then now we can grab the carpet and pull it underneath the pedals and back up. Now we just need to go on the other side and pull it up over there as well. Okay, so we're actually going to have to take this metal bracket off with these couple bolts here. Now we can pull up the carpet and get it out of our way. So now we have plenty of room for the dash to be able to pull back, and that harness is not going to be caught underneath the carpet. Now it's time to remove the dash. We have 2 bolts here. You can go ahead and remove them. You don't have to worry about the dash dropping because it has a little hook here that hooks into the body, so it's not going to fall down on you. And then there's another bolt right here. In the center of the dash, you have 2 10mm head bolts. Then on the driver's side, we have 3 bolts here, and got a second person. We're going to lay this dash back. We got some ratchet straps attached to the headrest to be able to support the dash, 1 on each side. Okay, so we're going to grab the dash and lay it back onto the seat now. I'm going to take my ratchet strap and hook it into the dash frame right there where the bolt used to go. Tension it up. And now it will just lay and rest on the seats. So now we got to remove this complete HVAC housing out of the interior of the vehicle. We're going to start on the engine compartment side and get our AC lines, heater core lines, and all the fasteners removed, and then we'll come on the inside and disconnect everything else. So the first thing we want to do under the hood is disconnect the heater hoses and then blow the coolant out of the heater core. We want to do this before we disconnect the AC system because I don't want any coolant going into the AC system to contaminate the system. So I recommend disconnecting the heater hoses at the engine instead of at the heater core because it's really hard to reach up there and get those hoses off. So it's got a quick connect fitting on the engine here, and just got a little couple plastic tabs, and you just press them in. You have to press both of them in at the same time. Ideally at the same time, but in this case, it's such a tight fit, you can only do one at a time. There you go. And then the other one just has a hose clamp right here. Make sure you have a pan underneath the vehicle to catch the coolant. So now I like to take some compressed air and force it through the heater hose to blow any coolant out. That way when you are removing the HVAC housing, you don't spill any coolant in the interior of the vehicle. So now we want to remove our AC line connection from the expansion valve. So you want to take a compressed air blower and blow all the dirt out. You don't want any dirt getting into the AC system. And then the nut is the 13mm. Now there are 2 nuts that you have to remove. One is underneath. If you follow the contour of the coolant reservoir here, there's a stud on the bottom that has a 10mm head nut. We're going to remove that one. And then there's one more underneath the AC expansion valve. See that stud right there? You need to remove that nut as well. So that's all there is to it under the hood. You had those 2 nuts, one underneath the reservoir, one underneath the expansion valve. You had the nut on the expansion valve itself for the AC lines, and you had your 2 heater hoses. Now we can move to the inside of the vehicle. So on the inside of the vehicle, we're going to start with removing the floor ducts from the HVAC housing. These can be tricky. If you get one of these radiator hose removal pliers that's bent and at 180 degrees, you can get on the inside here, and of course you want to pry the little plastic lip over that retaining tab. But the main thing you want to do is pull backwards. These things are tricky, and it's pretty much impossible to get all retaining tabs to disengage at one time because it's got 3 or 4 of them. But if you just pull back firmly, they will disengage themselves. Now we will repeat on the driver's side. Sometimes you might have to go around the bottom as well, because the bottom has a locking tab as well. They can definitely be very tricky, so be patient. So now it's finally time to remove the HVAC box. There is a harness here, this gray connector. This goes with the HVAC housing, so go ahead and pry it out of the body. And then there's going to be 3 10mm nuts. You have one here. There's one on top over here. And then there's one more right here. Now you can grab this whole assembly and pull it out. Now it's going to give you resistance. Most of these will give some resistance as you pull them off the firewall because the heater core pipes like to melt to this foam sometimes. So keep that in mind. As you can see, it's grabbing on this foam here. You'll see when I get it removed. And then just carefully snake it out. Remember, you still have the heater hoses connected to the heater core, so pull them through. And also, in fact, this one, okay, so there you can see where the foam was melted to the heater pipe. That was giving us some resistance. Also keep in mind, sometimes depending on how these clamps, these little squeeze clamps are located on the heater hose, they can get behind the sheet metal if you shift the case side to side. So make sure you're coming out straight with it. If not, these little clamps can grab that sheet metal, and if you pull too hard, you could damage the heater core. And now we can remove the whole housing out of the truck. So now before we take all this apart, we want to blow all the dirt off of it. I'm also going to go ahead and take all this foam tape off. You see how it disintegrates. This is why I highly recommend you get some new foam tape. It just completely crumbles. So the first thing I want to do is remove the wiring harness from all the actuators. And the evaporator temperature sensor here. Now remove the air inlet housing. Normally there's a couple clips here that you have to pull back to lift it up. These have been broken. Somebody tried to change this out in the past while it was still in the truck. And on the back side we have a couple clips as well. And this whole housing lifts off. Now remove the heater core by pulling these 2 Phillips screws out. And the whole heater core will slide out. Okay, sorry, it has a little plastic clip here. You gotta pry up. There you go. Now the heater core will slide out. Now remove the blower motor housing from the HVAC housing. It's got a series of clips and also has some screws. So you got Phillips screw by the expansion valve here. Another one on the other side. On the bottom, there is a clip here. And the rest is just these plastic clips. Now, there used to be a screw there. Somebody's already removed that one. So just start pulling gently while releasing the clips one at a time, working your way around. Pull this little foam piece off. Now we are replacing the evaporator core and the expansion valve. In fact, we're doing a complete AC system, so we don't have these ports clogged. But if you're not replacing the AC system, you want to make sure not to get any dirt in the AC. So put some, these are just some tapered silicone plugs to keep all the dirt out. Now the blower motor housing will come off, which contains the evaporator core as well. So now we're going to split the case. As you can see, it's got a parting line that goes all the way down the center, all the way around. And so there's various Phillips screws that attach it along with lots of clips. We have to pull this ductwork off right here to gain access to a screw underneath. To get that screw out. Now just go around and pry apart the case. Okay, I didn't mean to do that. There you go. Now we should be able to split the two case halves. So now we're going to pull this large plastic divider out, which also contains this mode door here. We're going to call this mode door the double tombstone mode door, as it's shaped like a tombstone almost. The double tombstone just pulls off of the divider, as you can see, like such. There's no fasteners, no clips, nothing, and the mode door itself just has a smooth shank that goes through this hole. There's nothing on the outside, it just pulls straight out. The other three doors that remain simply just pull right off their actuators. Here's one of the temperature blend doors. Here's another temperature blend. And here's the last remaining mode door. We're going to call this the double square mode door, and this one the double tombstone mode door to help identify which one's which. Now remove all four air door actuators. Yes, this dash does have 5 air door actuators. The 5th one would be located in the air inlet door, which we will get to later. And these simply just pull right off. Like I said, they're all the same part number, so you don't have to worry about getting them mixed up. So now each actuator has what I'm going to call a drive coupler that attaches the actuator to the door on the inside. And these things can be tricky to remove, as they have 3 expanding retainers that keep them in the HVAC housing. But I found if you take a 12.11 millimeter socket deep and use that to help compress those 3 ears, you can do that. And what I like to do is just stick an extension on the socket and I'm going to place this on top of a surface where I can push down on the housing, and as I'm pushing down, it's going to be compressing those 3 fingers on the backside. And then take some pliers here, and as you press down on the housing, grab this and rock it, and just rock it a little bit, and it should pull out. But as you can see here, it has those 3 fingers that I was talking about, where the socket will help compress those 3 fingers when enough force is applied. Now we're going to repeat the process for the other drive couplers. That one actually pressed out without even having to pull it, with just using the socket. So here you can see all 4 drive couplers that were removed. So one thing I do recommend you do is write down which doors were the blend doors and which doors on the mode had the tombstone shaped door and which one had the square shaped door. I marked both halves so there's no confusion when going back together. It's easy to tell which one's the blend door in the dual zone because they swivel in the center. And then as far as the mode doors, like I say, you have a square style, and then you have one that's sort of shaped like a tombstone. So like I said, mark those so you know where they go. Now when you go with the new drive couplers, they are aluminum. They are the exact same ones for both mode doors. The blend doors, they are different, so don't mix them up. You can see here the difference between the mode door drive coupler here and the blend door drive coupler. So unlike the factory drive coupler, which is plastic and has these retaining tabs that keep it from falling out of the HVAC housing, the aftermarket one is all aluminum and does not have any retention tabs. So when you install it in the case, it'll just fall out unless you have the actuator installed on top of it. So what you want to do is go ahead and first, this is going to be the square mode door, so we're going to take the square mode door and we're going to place it in position so we can line up the slot, because this drive coupler is slotted. We need to line that up with the door. There we go, it's lined up. Now we can go ahead and install the actuator on top. Now the actuator self-calibrates when we're done with this job. When we do the calibration procedure, it does not have to be clocked any certain way. You can install it any way you want, so long as it lines up with the screws for mounting. So now it's installed into the aluminum drive coupler. The drive coupler is engaged with the door and our screws are lined up. So we're going to go ahead and put our screws back in. Now the door can be removed at this point if you want to, but the main purpose for doing all that was just to get that drive coupler installed and timed correctly with the door. Like I said, it's not timed with the actuator, but it does need to be in a position, because if you have that off, if you just go ahead and drop that in there without the door in place and put your actuator on, you could have that slot where it's not lined up. It could be this way, and now you can't put your door on. So it does need to be in a position to where the door will go onto the drive coupler. Now, although we do have brand new actuators to replace the old ones with, I'm going to install the old ones first. That way I can send power and ground to these actuators and make sure that the doors function properly. And in case I were to damage the actuator for whatever reason, at least I'm not damaging the new one. But this way I can test all the doors on the bench before installing all this back into the truck, because you never know where one of these doors might be machined a little bit off, or the case may be a little bit different and it might rub on some part of the plastic housing and you need to take it back apart to clearance something. Stuff happens. You know, sometimes you do run into issues with aftermarket components, so we do want to bench test this before we stick it back in the truck. So now we're going to repeat the process for the dry coupler on the tombstone shaped door. So we're going to drop the door into the housing, engage the slot with the door, and then engage the actuator with the mounting holes lined up with the drive coupler. So you might have to move the door in the dash to be able to line up the holes on the actuator, the screw holes. Once they're lined up, You can go ahead and remove the door if you want, and go ahead and get that door or the actuator screwed down now that the drive coupler is aligned. Just make sure that you can still engage your door. There you go, it's engaged, so we know everything is lined up. So now we're going to be installing the drive couplers for the blend doors. Now the blend doors, one of them is different than the other. As you can see, there's a cutout, there's a notch here in this door. So if we look at the housing here, see how this housing is nice and flat all the way until the pivot point of the door, versus this one has the step. Obviously, the stepped side is going to go with the notched door, and the smooth case is going to go with the unnotched door. So just like with the mode doors, put your door in, line up your drive coupler, and then take your door or your actuator and position it into the drive coupler. Line it up with the screw holes and fasten it down. Now for the final blend door. Same process. Okay, so now that we have all of our drive couplers installed into the case, we're going to go ahead and we need to remove the two mode doors because they need to go over this divider. So this one here, we're going to remove it, and you can see where it's supposed to go there. We're going to position it like so. And this mode door goes right there. You see it's got the two cutouts for the shaft. And then we're going to be lining them up and setting them down into place with a divider. We already have this one blend door installed. As you can see there, that blend door is ready to go. Remember, the notched blend door is going to go on the other side. So this being the smooth bottom, we have the smooth square blend door there. And then the divider simply snaps into place. Make sure to adjust your door. So right now you see it's moving freely. That's because it's not engaged with the drive coupler. So rotate it into where it falls onto the drive coupler, and you can no longer pivot the door. Same thing with this one. We're locked in. We're going to take our divider, gently push it back into place. Alright, so now it's time to take both case halves and put them back together. We want to take our last blend door that has not been installed and put it into position. And we can't just simply take this and try to stick it down on there straight, or else the blend door would fall out. So I'm going to stand them both up. And you just got to line everything up. Okay, so on this side, you see how the door is not lined up in either one of those holes. We need to reach down in here and grab the door and lift it up into position. See, now it's lined up. Same thing with the door on the bottom. You might need to get a long pick and reach down there and pick that door up. So here I'm going to take a long 90-degree pick. I'm going to reach down there and I'm going to try pulling up the shaft. At this point we can lay the whole case over sideways, and you just got to work around with it, and got to get both of these shafts lined up at the same time. As you can see, they're now both lined up. Don't forget your blend door where they go together in the center. Make sure that that they are engaged with one another. I can feel that when I move this door, it moves the other one, so they should be engaged. At that point, we can go ahead and just start snapping it all back together. Now we're going to reinstall our 3 Phillips screws that hold the case halves together. Alright, so now that the case halves are back together, this step is not required, but I do recommend you do it. We're going to take the harness that we removed originally, we're going to plug it back into the actuator, and here I have a power probe, and basically what I'm going to be doing is sending 12 volts to one pin of the actuator, and I'm going to be grounding the other pin. So I have ground on the black wire, and it doesn't matter which one you send ground to, because you're going to be reversing the polarity to change door direction. So just hook it up whichever way you want at first, and when I toggle this switch, it's going to be sending positive power to this red wire, and we can watch the door move. As you can see, it moves without obstruction. If we want to move it the other way, just reverse the leads, send ground onto the other wire, and now we can see that the door moves with no obstructions, which is very important. You just never know what could possibly happen where you might need to clearance some of the plastic for the doors to work. So highly recommended to do that. And just keep in mind, if you don't have these fancy back probes, you could use a paper clip to push it into the connector and back probe it that way. So now we're going to be testing this actuator connected to this other mode door. As you can see, it moves freely. Now we're testing the other direction. Works just fine. So now we're going to be testing this blend door here. As you can see, works just fine. And now we're testing the final blend door. Looks good to me. So now I'm going to go ahead and pull off all of these old actuators and replace them with the new Mopar actuators. So now reinstall the air duct that we removed earlier. Now before we put the blower motor housing back on, if you're replacing the evaporator core, go ahead and remove it. It's very easy, just pulls right out of here. As you can see, this is why you want to run a cabin filter. These things get clogged full of dirt. And I also highly recommend, obviously you want to clean all this out, go ahead and pull your blower motor as well. That way we can blow all the dirt out of the blower motor fins. It's just 3 screws and that blower motor will come right out. So now we're going to blow all this stuff out. If you're replacing the evaporator core, when you go back together with it and you start pushing the new evaporator core into place, you will notice that, okay, well that one actually just went in there real easy. But a lot of times you have to reach back in from the inside and push the bottom side of the evaporator core this way, because it's got a plastic lip that it has to go behind, and this foam, most of the time when you start pushing it down there, will push the evaporator core that way. So you got to pull it over on the bottom towards you, and then it will push in and tuck up under this plastic lip where it needs to be. So now we can take our blower motor housing and snap it back onto the main HVAC housing. Put the clip back on there and reinstall the various screws. Now we're going to be working on repairing this air inlet door. As you can see, this one's cracked really bad, which is why we ended up buying a new one. But we're gonna go ahead and repair it to show how it's done, and I'll probably go ahead and repair the new one so the new one does not end up cracked like this one. So we'll go ahead and practice on the old one, as I personally have not done this repair before. So we want to remove our actuator first, and then our drive coupler. Once the drive coupler has been removed, we should be able to take this door and remove it out of the housing. Oh hey, look, the coupler on this one just pulls right out with the actuator, making it very simple. Now we got the actuator off here, we want to be able to pull this door out. It's easiest if you pull these clips up, there's a couple on each side, and pull this upper part of the housing off. Now you got more room to get your hand behind here to work. This peg, you can push it through the hole with just a Phillips screwdriver to disengage the peg from the hole, and then pull it out the front. And there you go. Now we can put these templates on here, drill our holes, and get this done. So on the air inlet door, you can see the female splines where the old drive coupler went break. And so they're going to have us cut those off flush to install the repair bracket. As you can see, the repair bracket, it's slotted here to go over this, this part of the door, but it can't go on, it can't go flush because that's in the way. So we're going to have to cut that off flush. And then on the outside, they have this bracket that's meant only as a template. So you're supposed to push it up until you can't push it any further, and then clamp it with a pair of vice grips and drill out the 3 holes. That will transfer the 3 holes to the inside, of course, where this is going to be bolted on. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this off, and then we'll drill these holes and bolt this on. So now we have the drill template, vice gripped to the door. Like I said, we're going to push it up all the way until it can't go any farther. The tapered portions will meet up with the tapered lip of the door, and we're going to take a 3/16 drill bit and drill through. So now that we have the holes drilled, I had to take a little bit off of this aluminum plate with a belt sander, just a little bit, for it to drop down in there where it needs to be. And some people claim that they would keep the template plate on the outside to sandwich the door. And that would be a great idea. However, you will see in the next clip why it's not a good idea, in that it spaces these screws up too far off of the door, and it interferes with this plastic lip here. So here you can see when we try to use the plate to sandwich the door, the screws will interfere with the movement of the door. At least in my case, you see how they're rubbing right there? Okay, so now that we know it won't work with the template installed, I've removed the template and we have just the screw heads on this side of the door. There you go. And we're just going to go ahead and install it. I like to just stick it in here and roll it up underneath. You see how it's got the cutout here and here? You want to put this rubber seal underneath that cutout and pivot it around, and go ahead and line up your pin there with the hole, and then it'll just drop right in. It was pretty straightforward. And then we have our drive coupler here. You can see it's like a half moon. We're going to engage it into the repair bracket. There you go. Now, these screws have plenty of clearance because it no longer has the drill template underneath the screw heads. Now I will say, if you did want to run the template on the outside to sandwich the door, you could, if you were to remove some plastic off of that housing to give it some more clearance. So if you want to do that, you can. So I'm going to go ahead and modify this one. We'll see how it works. Now we don't want to take too much material off because remember, the seal does ride up against this surface. Okay, so after clearancing the plastic there on the housing, it works just fine with the template installed. So I'll probably go ahead and do that to the new one. I would recommend clearancing it a little more because the template itself, you can see, almost touches, and if you push the door over, it does have some contact there. So you want to take off about the same amount I took off in the previous clip there, but go almost to the top. That way it clears the whole door. But that repair there should last a lifetime. Here we have the repair brackets installed on the new air inlet door. I will say the machine work is very nice quality. You can see the aluminum half moon lines up perfect with the half moon that was in the original plastic door. So very, very accurate machine work, and this repair worked very well. At first I was a little skeptical, but now after installing it, I really, really like this. This definitely will never ever give any more problems with this door. Now that we have the repair brackets installed, we can go ahead and install our drive coupler and just turn it with your hand. Make sure that the door moves freely, and then after that, go ahead and install your new actuator. There's no need to test this actuator with power because we just tested it with our hand. Now we can go ahead and install the air inlet housing. Just pushes down, snaps into place, and then install our cabin air filter. These things have an arrow indicating airflow, so you want the arrow facing down. Now we're going to reinstall the heater core into the HVAC housing. Now all you got to do is transfer the heater hoses over to the new heater core. If you replace the heater core, transfer your expansion valve over if you replace the evaporator core. And don't forget this foam seal on the drain. If you do, it will leak condensate into the cab. Of course, throw your wiring harness back on there. Don't forget to put PAG oil in the evaporator core. If you replaced the evaporator core, usually 1 ounce of PAG 46. For this application, it would be PAG 46. We put new foam on top, so it's ready to be reinstalled. Now that the HVAC housing is all put back together, you can go ahead and reinstall everything. I didn't video any of that because it's just the reverse of removal. And then don't forget, you will need to have the AC system evacuated and recharged with refrigerant, and you will need to retop off the engine coolant. And now I'm going to show you the actuator recalibration procedure with this snap-on scanner. So to recalibrate the actuators, you have to go into the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning module, and it's going to be under system test, at least with a snap-on scanner. Actuator recalibration. It says here it's going to test all the doors to their full travel limits. Continue. Now I'm going to show you on the recirculation air door, you will see that it moves the door all the way one way and all the way the other. It does that with every single door to know its travel limits, and that's how it calibrates each actuator.